Hello and welcome to episode 202 of the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith, and this is the penultimate episode of our Leviticus series. Today, we're diving into a question that's tripped up more than a few Bible readers. Leviticus 23, 42-43. Did Israel dwell in booths or in tents? But before we unpack that, let me hook you with a few questions that'll have you leaning in. Have you ever pictured the Israelites fresh out of Egypt, trudging through the desert, and wondered, were they really hunkered down in flimsy branch huts, or was it those classic Bedouin-style tents we've all seen in movies? And why on earth would God command His people to relive that discomfort every fall, building rickety shelters just to remember a tough road trip? What if this isn't a contradiction at all, but a divine nudge to recall not just survival, but total dependence on Him? It's kind of like looking at an old family photo from when times were lean. Today you've got a roof, a job, a pantry with food, but that faded picture of Grandpa's little two-room starter house tells the real story of where your family came from. Sukkot is God saying, don't lose that picture. Stick with me, friends. We're about to find out. From the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, here's the problem laid out plain. They write this: Here the people of Israel are told to dwell in booths. But earlier, in Exodus 16:16, it speaks of everyone being in his tent. On the surface, it feels like the Bible's contradicting itself. One verse, booths, the next, tents. But hold on, because the solution from that same Big Book of Bible Difficulties clears the air beautifully. They write, since the people moved throughout the wilderness for 40 years, their homes were tents. However, the Leviticus passage does not speak of their homes in the wilderness, but about later instructions for celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, booths, in Jerusalem. Since it was only for a week, they were instructed to make temporary booths in which to live while at the feasts. There was, after all, no Holiday Inn in Jerusalem at the time. Okay, let's ground this in the text itself. Leviticus 23, 42-43 from the New Living Translation says this: For 7 days you must live outside in little shelters. All native-born Israelites must live in shelters. This will remind each new generation of Israelites that I made their ancestors live in shelters when I rescued them from the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Okay, it's been a while since we checked in with our friends from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Their commentary on Leviticus 23:43 notes this: Only here is the festival of booths historicized. Nowhere else in the Bible is a tradition of living specifically in booths after the Exodus recorded. Okay, that's a sharp observation. It pins this as a unique tie back to the Exodus, almost like God saying, don't forget the fragility of that first step into freedom. Timing-wise, the Festival of Tabernacles, booths, shelters, Sukkot, if you want to sound scholarly, hit from about the 15th to the 21st of September, smack in harvest season. But it's no casual autumn picnic. This is a pilgrimage feast. Branches waved, sacrifices offered, families huddled up in temporary huts, retelling the story of dependence and deliverance. Now, let's lean into why this matters. The Big Book of Bible Difficulties nails it. Tents were the long-haul reality, portable, practical setups for 40 years of wandering, like in Exodus where manna is gathered in his tent. But Leviticus is zooming in on symbolism, not a literal replay of wilderness camp life. Those booths, Sukkot, were flimsy, three-walled structures with a roof of branches open to the night sky, a posture of vulnerability baked right into the architecture. The point wasn't comfort, it was memory. This is how Chris Katulka puts it in his article, Practicing the Presence of God, the Feast of Tabernacles. It goes, you must live in temporary shelters for 7 days. Every native citizen in Israel must live in temporary shelters so that your future generations may know that I made the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, for I am the Lord your God. Katolka emphasizes that while the Israelites did dwell in tents during the wilderness, the festival's booths were a deliberate symbol, a yearly crash course in God's faithfulness when his people had nothing but him. Echoing that, One for Israel's article, The Meaning of the Feast of Tabernacles, describes these Sukkot as distinct from the durable tents of the Exodus, temporary structures with at least 3 walls and a natural roof open enough to see the stars. They quote Deuteronomy 16:13-17 with this: "You shall keep the Feast of Booths for 7 days. You shall rejoice in your feast, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful." Now, from a Jewish perspective, Menachem Posner writes in What is Sukkot on Chabad.org that Sukkah commemorates the temporary dwellings God made to shelter our ancestors on their way out of Egypt. Some say this refers to the miraculous clouds of glory that shielded us from the desert sun, while others say it refers to the tents in which they dwelled in their 40-year trek through the Sinai desert. Okay, notice the nuance. It's those initial miraculous shelters, clouds, or the first makeshift booths at Sukkot, not necessarily the full 40-year tent life. And Hal, writing on Bible.org in the Feast of Israel, Booths, Sukkot, gets practical. He writes, "In remembrance of this period, the Jews were to erect tiny makeshift booths and live in them. This reminded them that their forefathers had little shelter during their wilderness trek." For a deeper dive, Project Muse's chapter, A History of Sukkot in the Second Temple and Rabbinic Periods, highlights how the ritual was revived after the exile. Nehemiah says, "The whole community made booths and dwelt in the booths." That's Nehemiah 8:17. Not as nomad gear, but as a ritual reenactment, a sacred memory made tangible. So let's land this plane, friends. Did Israel dwell in booths or tents? The answer is yes, but in different contexts. Tents were the everyday reality of 40 years of wandering. Booths were the symbolic reenactment commanded in Leviticus, pointing not to the long slog of wilderness travel, but to the fragile beginnings, that raw moment after God broke the chains of Egypt and said, "Trust me." It's a bit like reenacting the first night you brought your newborn home, not because you want to relive the exhaustion, but because remembering the fragility makes you grateful for the growth that came after. The booth is that first night, fragile, temporary, unforgettable. God didn't say, "Remember the tents." He said, "Remember the shelters. Remember vulnerability. Remember dependence. Remember me." Sukkot is God turning discomfort into delight, harvest abundance into holy memory, a reminder that the God who sheltered wanderers under clouds still tabernacles with us today. If today's episode sparked something, maybe a fresh insight, maybe a question, send me a note at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com or connect on Facebook. I'd love to hear how this lands for you. You can find this episode and all others at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com or on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, everywhere you listen. I'm Lance Smith. Thanks for spending this time with me. Until next time, here's wishing you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.